Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Afif, a client partner at Unity, and I'll be joined today by Henry Rull. Hey, Henry.
Hi, I'm Henry Rull, Publisher Operations Manager here at Unity.
In this session today, we'll be covering the impact of ad creative when it comes to acquiring valuable users to grow your app, as well as the importance of UA managers being part of the creative process.
We'll also be breaking down some creative along with sharing some insights from our new performance benchmarking report that will be available now.
Henry has experience as a UA manager, and I have experience working for an advertising agency. So we will combine our insights from our experience here at Unity along with our past lives. So let's get started. With a total of around 295,000 apps serving ads through the Unity ad network and 114 million plus users seeing those ads each month, how are those ads served to each person so that ultimately we can show the right one to the right person? Well, simply put, it's the probability to convert of that person watching the ad times the bid price or CPI times 1,000. And that translates into the ECPM. The ECPM, or effective cost per 1,000 impressions, is what determines how competitive your ad is. The ECPM equals the CPI, or the cost per install, times the start to install conversion rate, times 1,000. To put things in perspective, here's a high-level explanation of what happens at the ad request, or when it's time to show an ad. Let's say that Henry is playing Archero and needs an extra life to carry on playing. At this point, he's going to watch an ad to get that extra life. So for the sake of this example, let's say that 3 advertisers are competing for that specific placement to show Henry their ad. Advertiser number 1 has a CPI of $3. Advertiser number 2 has a CPI of $1. And advertiser number 3 has a CPI of $2. Now, when it comes to the conversion rate, we can see that they have very different conversion rates. And referring back to the ECPM formula, we have to multiply that by 1,000, which ultimately will give us the ECPMs. So obviously, with an ECPM of $12 being the highest ECPM, advertiser number 3 is going to win the impression and show the ad to Henry. Now, going back to the formula for success, during this session, we will be looking at one specific component within that formula, which is the conversion rate or start to install conversion. And by working on that component and having a higher conversion rate, this will allow advertisers to have a more flexible bidding strategy. So, for example, acquiring users at a lower cost per install so that ultimately you're getting the best return on ad spend. The conversion rate is impacted by a lot of different factors, and among the most important ones is the quality of your assets, whether it's a video, a banner, a playable, to name a few. And whether we want it or not, automation is taking over, and the focus of UA managers will shift from mostly optimizing campaigns to being more focused on something else. And this will most probably be the creative process. With Henry, we'll go over a few recommendations and best practices that can help you stand out in the modern mobile marketing world we live in today. So during my time as a client partner, I've noticed the importance of UA managers being more involved in the creative process. So let's just quickly take a look at what the flow of building an ad for a client is like in a traditional marketing agency. So at the core of everything, there's an account person who's the main touch point between the clients and the agency. For this example, let's say that a brand like Red Bull wants a new ad to promote their energy drink to university students during exams. So the way it would usually happen is that the account manager receives a brief from the client with all the basic information. And at this point, it's not only about passing that brief to the creative department who will make the ad, but first, the account manager will have to put together a creative brief for his creative team to develop the idea further. In short, it's the account person that is at the heart of the creative brief, and the idea is then further developed by the creative team. And in my opinion, this is the kind of approach that UA managers should start leaning towards if they haven't already, to really start owning the process from start to finish. And with that, really channel your inner Don Draper. At the end of the day, if people don't respond to your ads, it's not great. And yes, there are best practices. However, everyone has access to those. But the ones that really stand out are the ones that execute well on them. We'll get into the specific best practices later on. What we're trying to say is that you can actually influence and have a massive impact on your creative team. Even if you're not a graphic designer or an animator, you can collaborate and add a lot of value to the process. And one way of doing so is through the power of brainstorming. Henry, what is your previous experience with brainstorming when you were doing user acquisition at Kabam?
Yeah, so obviously we would share creative performance results to our creative team on a weekly basis. That was usually done via email. However, every other week, so on a bi-weekly cadence, we would actually meet in person to go over performance. But in addition, we'd also hold a creative brainstorming session. During the actual meeting, each person from both teams, the creative and UA team, we would share at least one new ad that they came across that week, and we'd break it down and essentially looked at what we liked about these ads and what we didn't like. But at the end of the session, we would have a few key takeaways to guide the process for our next batch of creatives. So essentially, like you're saying from this slide, we reference a lot of other ads to help inspire our creative team to try and come up with the next best performing creative for our game. So really just reference a lot of ads to inspire your next creative team.
Nice. Would you agree that it's important to think freely, and no matter how crazy an idea is while brainstorming, ideas are neither silly nor impossible?
Yeah, so during these creative sessions, we use like a blue sky approach where essentially, anything goes. Really, no matter how silly the idea might sound, really just put it out there. Maybe we won't use the exact idea that you say, but maybe there's like an iteration we could base it off of. So really, there's no such thing as like a dumb idea when it comes to creative sessions, but really put everything out there because who knows which might come out with.
Thanks for that. So in summary, we all know that, but it's important to remind ourselves that collaboration and communication are key to success. So really take ownership of the creative process to drive the best ideas. Also, book some time with your creative team to leverage collective brain power. You'd be surprised of the outcome of a well-led brainstorming session. And last but not least, let your creative team know what's performing, what's not, and most importantly, constantly inspire them with fresh ideas or references to support your ideas. At the end of the day, it's all about testing, really. Every network is different. They are powered by different algorithms, by different people. They are also very different when it comes to the users, which is why it's important to try to understand the products you're working with. And that's why we're here. As a client partner, it's my duty to educate our advertisers about our products so they can feel comfortable to make their own decisions when it comes to campaign creation or campaign optimization. And knowing that, it's important to dive into the specifics of every network. Let's just take a look at this slide. And imagine that this black rectangle is Unity's inventory. And creative one is a creative within a campaign, which has a start to install conversion rate of 1%. It's worth noting here that creative one converts or intrigues a specific cohort of users within our inventory. And this means that the behavior of those users is more or less similar. Now, we've just added 2 creative sets to this campaign. And the visuals, the concept of these 3 videos in this case are very different and appeal to different users within our inventory. So by having different concepts, the reach of your campaign becomes broader. The last creative was added to this campaign, also a completely new concept, and targets a completely different audience. You will notice that it has the lowest CVR of all with 0.4%. The first thought of a campaign manager would be to remove this creative. Yes, it might be a good move to remove it. However, low conversion rate does not mean low quality. The quality of the users that are coming through this particular creative might be superior to the others. So make decisions based on the quality that comes, the quality of the users that come through the different creatives, if your internal BI tools allow you to do so. Every ad has a life. It starts when it's freshly added to a campaign, and at some point you will notice a sudden decline in performance. And at this point, the creative team should be ready to launch a new batch or replace the bad performing ad. The better a team is able to plan and produce creatives, the more prepared the team is to respond to dips in performance. And thus, by replacing those creatives at the right time, you're able to maintain an elevated mean performance, which means that you're able to keep the higher ECPM at all times, which is essential for successful user acquisition. In summary, experiment, but also be smart about it because you have access to all the information you need to run successful user acquisition. Your client partner is here for that. But also, lower conversion rate does not necessarily mean bad performance. Look at the quality of the users that are coming through a specific creative. With that being said, test different concepts to target as broad as an audience as possible and double down on what works. Last but not least, be ready for the next cycle of creatives and make sure that most of those have your ideas implemented in. Henry, would you agree on that?
Yeah, what you have here is good. The only thing I would like to reinforce really is the specific timeline for a creative. Sometimes you'll hear from like other advertisers out there. There's like you should be refreshing creatives on a weekly basis. But really, each creative life cycle is different. So it's just extremely important that you guys pay attention to the KPIs for each individual creative. As Christian mentioned, a low conversion rate doesn't necessarily mean bad performance. Look at all of the KPIs. Maybe the ROAS is good for that creative. Maybe IPM is good. Just make sure that you're listening to the KPIs to see when it is time to cycle in a new creative. Ideally, these new creatives take into account some creative best practices, which leads us to our next topic.
Thanks, Henry. I'm gonna kick it over to you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
So now that you guys know the importance of being involved during the creative process, let's switch gears a little bit and go over some best practices. I'll actually be sharing some creatives from some of our ad partners and breaking them down. And at the end of the section, I'll actually provide you with some KPIs of their performance and how they compare to our network. The first creative is from one of our ad partners, Tripledot, for their game Woodoku. So pretty straightforward and simple ad, right? However, they do a lot of great things, albeit subtle, that make this a great performing ad. We'll actually break it down. So the first thing I noticed when I first watched this ad was the inclusive intro. Now, all UA managers know the importance of the first 3 to 5 seconds of a video. I don't need to go over why it's important. Really, I just want to go over how Tripledot executed upon that early engage creative best practice, which simply was just framing 2 questions to the user. How old are you? Do you want to test your brain age? Again, 2 basic questions, but they do a great job on keeping the user engaged with the ad so they watch the creative longer. The second thing that I noticed was really the simplistic controls. This tactic, again, nothing new, nothing crazy, but it's very important, especially for this form factor. More often than not, when a user is playing a game on their mobile phone, they want easy controls. So simply showing easy drag and drop controls for this game, like, quickly displays how easy this game is to just pick up and play. The third thing was noob style gameplay, or that's what I call it. But it's essentially just showing bad gameplay. It's actually an iteration from the popular pro versus noob themed ads from back in the day, where they would split the ad in half. On one side of the screen, they would show like very good strategic gameplay, and the other side was just bad gameplay, this noob style gameplay. It was actually very effective, specifically for types of personalities where, well, for me as a gamer, especially, a competitor as well, when I see something like this, it gives me somewhat of an urge to really take over, or in this case, like, download the game and show people how it's actually done, or how it's done correctly. One other practice I utilized pretty well was the audio. It was actually really catchy for this specific ad, kind of head bobbing. So I just wanted to leave the ad playing just to keep listening. So this is a very well done tactic to help keep your user engaged. Lastly, it's just all subtle touches, especially what they use to end this ad. So simply showing the viewer what the app icon looks at, or what the app icon looks like. Even if they don't download the game immediately after the ad, or after viewing this specific ad, they may see it later on in the App Store. Similar to the title click search bar practice, just visualizing what the user needs to type in the App Store search bar to find this game. It just helps promote more like a longer term creative retention. A lot of UA managers think multi-touch attribution. That's another topic of interest. Like, this helps reinforce that essentially topic, giving users something to remember. So maybe longer term they do convert. And lastly, the last small subtle touch is really the pseudo search button. At least for Unity ads, touching that search button won't do anything. You actually need to click on the proper CTA to install the app. However, seeing such a vibrant search button, that's pretty big, it kind of gives you a twitch feeling to potentially touch the ad or hit the search button to try to install the app. I'll actually jump into how this creative performed, but before I do so, I just wanted to go over one more set of creatives, and then we go over the actual KPIs of each of them. This next example is from a studio named Shark Jump. They created a game called Castle Fusion. The first creative is actually one of their very first UA ads that really well for them on initial launch, and the second creative is like an iteration of the first one. So again, this was one of the developers' earlier creatives. It's actually one of 3 creative ads they had when they first launched. Similar to the Tripledot example, this is pretty straightforward. It just executes well on a lot of subtle great practices. Some being using vibrant colors to catch users' eyes, showing a variety of powers, and then appeal to different types of users, as well as having pleasing audio. And in this example specifically, I would say not necessarily the music audio because you can barely hear it, but it was more of like the tiny sound effect audio bits that you heard when each tower was like constructing itself. Like those small things make a great impact for any creative. This was actually their best performing creative really early on, but as time progressed, obviously creative fatigue happened and they needed to release new creatives. So it only made sense to build upon what had worked for them, which brings us to version 2. Nice. All right, so we'll actually break this one down a little bit further. So the first thing, vibrant colors. They stuck with that strategy from version 1. It worked well, so why not keep with it? Again, this catches the viewer's eye. Variety. Another strategy they kept with. It seems to work. One thing I wanted to mention here, though, is really when it comes to variety, it's not only a strategy that displays like a sense of depth and all the different customizations you can have within the game, but it also allows for like different power types to appeal to different types of users. For example, like maybe the catapults and ballistas they showed earlier on in the creative appealed to me, whereas like these tanks, mechs, and warships appeal to Christian. Essentially, it just gives you a wider range of appeal to different users. One other thing they actually added here for variety was the different maps, where they showed, the castle map the first time. The second map had a bunch of elephants going down a road, and the third map had all the tanks and the warships. They actually didn't have this in the first one, so it was great to see them add more like variety in the second version. Simplistic controls. As you can see from this example, the easy drag and drop is really displaying how easy it is to play this game. It does wonders for users because they really just want an easy experience when playing the game on their mobile phone. So audio, once again, not super catchy music like the Tripledot example. Not the sound effects were good too, but really this time for audio is more like having an action-themed background music along with the provided visuals is really great in portraying like an epic adventure for their game Castle Fusion. So like it just synergized really well to sell a creative asset to the user to get them engaged with the ad. And lastly, again, all of these little touches. Like it's great this time around, they actually had an ending to the creative with the pseudo battle button and showing the app title. So again, just like having that battle now call out is great. Like they won't be able to install from clicking it, but if you get the user to click on the screen or closer to click on the screen, it's doing its job.
Henry, thanks so much for that. Just a quick question for you. How do you decide how many of those elements you should put together at once within one creative?
Now, Nice. To be honest, it really depends. There's no there's no one formula that works great for all creatives. It's really just using whatever best practices works for your app. Um, it's more like executing well on common best practices. But again, as you mentioned before, it's all about testing, right? A/B testing. See what creatives work, see which ones don't. Keep the best practices that are working for you, and iterate off ones that are maybe not that might not be working as well, and just changing them, transforming them to see if they become better or perform better. All right. So we provided some examples of some good creatives. We went over what best practices they actually used to be good creatives, but how did they actually perform? So luckily, we recently compiled some performance benchmarking data for our network. So we're able to compare these creatives' performance against the network average. I'm happy to announce that Unity will actually be releasing this performance benchmarking insights report to everyone. It will be available to download on our website. Within the report, we provide some benchmarking data for various performance KPIs. Some of them we talked about today, like conversion, CPI, and eCPM. There are others. We break it down by platform, iOS and Android, as well as store category, as you can see here from the picture. We also provide these benchmark data for three main geo groups, which is US, Tier 1 English and EMEA, and lastly, Tier 1 APAC, which consists of China, Japan, and Korea. Along with these benchmarking reports, there's also some various key takeaways we found while compiling and analyzing the data. You can see some examples here. But essentially, this is just a bunch of admonitions to help strengthen your UA campaign strategies when buying on the Unity network. So let's actually go over the specific KPIs for each example. So the first one we'll go over is a Tripledot example. They categorize as puzzle on the iOS App Store. So we'll be benchmarking off of iOS, and then we'll stick with US for now. On this slide, you can see three charts for the three main KPIs, CVR, CPI, and eCPM. These are actually box charts, which provide you with a min, average, and max for each corresponding KPI. This essentially provides you with a performance range for the specific category, platform, and geo combination. So for example, on US iOS, the lowest CPI we're seeing for puzzle is 19 cents, whereas the largest CPI is $5.26. However, the average CPI for all puzzle apps on the Unity network is about $1.83. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit how to read these charts. I'll throw in Woodoku as well, so we can compare it against the benchmarks. So here we go. Woodoku's CVR, 1.23%, which is higher than the Unity network average of 0.81%. That's good. So for CPI, they're actually lower. But again, for cost per install, it's better to be lower. So $1.15 compared to the $1.83 in the average for puzzle US iOS. That combination allows Woodoku to actually maintain a strong eCPM, essentially on par with the Unity network average of 1462. So again, a high CVR allowed for a low CPI to actually have a strong eCPM to give it a better chance to display. Next up, so this is the Castle Fusion version 2 creative. So on Android this time, Castle Fusion categorizes as casual. So we'll stick with the US, and we'll be doing benchmarking off of casual Android US. Again, it's the same three charts, but the averages have been changed due to the platform and category changes. So let's just throw in Castle Fusion on the charts. And again, a very similar story to Tripledot. High CVR, 1.86% compared to the 1.45% network average. CPI is essentially on par with the network average, but the higher conversion rate with a similar CPI actually allowed it to have a very strong CPM above the Unity ad network average, 1140, which gives it a very high chance to win a high position in the waterfall and display its ad. Really like going over the best practices and these performance, it just shows like how much of an impact the creative is for your campaign. So hopefully those best practices we went over can help you come up with some great creative strategies. And I'll toss it over to Christian now to wrap it up.
Thank you, Henry. So let's combine everything that you and I went over today. Ad creative is a key component of the eCPM formula when determining what ad to serve to which user. And the better your ad is, the more responsive users are, and the higher your conversion rate, thus the more flexible your bidding strategy. Also, in an increasingly automated world, you can focus on creative to drive impact and really channel your inner Don Draper and creative soul. Become directly involved in the process, in the creative process specifically. Collaborate, brainstorm, borrow, but please don't steal.
And again, utilize best practices. Common best practices are fine, like the ones we talked over, simplistic controls, audio, and subtle touches, but really execute well on these best practices because they could really make an impact when it comes to your campaigns. And lastly, check out the full creative benchmark report to dive into what you can expect from Unity's network and leverage these learnings for your own campaign. So thanks, everyone, for attending this Unite Now session on creative best practices and the importance of ad creative on performance. We hope you learned a lot, built your Unity skills, and improved your user acquisition efforts. Feel free to give us feedback. Be sure to check out the Unite Now page for other sessions. If you want to dive into more about Unity's user acquisition offerings, check out unity.com/acquire. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.